Yes, a very good morning to you. It's the last time you hear me say those words for a little while. It's Friday the 23rd of October 2020. Welcome back to the best On Ground Weekday Kickoff, and a little bit melancholy as this is the last of the daily episodes we'll be recording for 2020. But thank you so much for watching and listening. It's been a lot of fun. My name's Pete Fairbairn, and the premise of the show is really simple. I get one of Australia's top media personalities on the line with me to dissect 5 of the biggest stories making waves in Australian sport bright and early, and we deliver it so you can consume it at the very start of your day. Today, one of the absolute superstars of this show. She's been fantastic many times over and over again. Natalie Yoannidis in Melbourne. How are you?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Pete. And well done on what's been a really fantastic series. It was an idea that you had while we were all in isolation, and it's just been a really great way to start the day.
It has been a lot of fun, and it seems appropriate to finish it with the AFL and NRL Grand Finals on this weekend, and that's really where we're going to focus our attention today. We're going to start with AFL and a story from Michael Warner in the Herald Sun. He's been speaking with Geelong coaching great Mark Bomber Thompson, who says a premiership in Gary Ablett's final game would be fitting for the best player he's ever seen. Thompson coached Gary Ablett Jr to 2 flags in 2007 and 2009, and he said he rated the 2-time Brownlow medalist ahead of his famous father, Gary Ablett Sr., ahead of North Melbourne great Wayne Carey, and even ahead of Hawthorn legend Lee Matthews as the greatest player of all time. He will play game 357 in the grand final. He's played 19 seasons, 2 Brownlows, 8 All-Australian jumpers, 6 best and fairest, and 5 AFLPA MVPs. And if you saw his third quarter last week, he's still got it. The guy could probably go around again. Nat, is Gary Ablett underrated? And I say that because we know he's an all-time great, but he's perhaps not spoken as the greatest of all time very often. And where do you think he does rank in those conversations?
It's really interesting, Pete. We were actually talking about this just last night, about the fact that Gary Ablett probably does go a little bit under the radar when you talk about the greatest players of the modern era. And what we decided was that it's probably because he spent a large chunk of his career up on the Gold Coast, away from Victorian eyes. No one was watching those games. They were like the twilight Fox Sports games that no one really had eyeballs on. So a big chunk of his career was up on the Gold Coast when people weren't really paying attention. And he was sensational up there. We can't forget just how good he was, basically carrying that Gold Coast side, that young team, in their first couple of seasons in the competition. So I think that we forget a little bit just how good Gary Ablett is. I'm glad he's come back to Geelong to finish his career. And that game on the weekend, he was sensational. He really did wind back the clock. And I think you're right. He could probably go around again. Obviously, he's got a couple of family issues and, just wants to be around his family and his little boy, which is completely understandable and very honourable. But talent-wise, he could probably go around again. I just think that we forget a little bit how good he was, particularly when he was at Geelong the first time around, and how big a story it was when he was recruited to the Suns. It was the only thing we were talking about for months on end.
Well, of course, the irony being that Mark Bomber Thompson, making these comments, Thompson and Ablett had a massive falling out when Ablett did leave Geelong and head to the Gold Coast. I think you've hit the nail on the head. Being off Broadway probably impacted the amount of times we watched Gary Ablett play for the years that he was on the Gold Coast. He had some injury issues up there as well, obviously. He missed a big chunk of this season to stay with his family rather than join the hub. So this is a guy who if he played every game, would be over the 400 game mark as well, because he has missed big chunks throughout his career. The one lament for me is that we haven't had the opportunity to see him play 2-3 seasons as a permanent leading forward. I know he's not a big brute in the mould of a Tom Hawkins, but I feel like in a normal season with 20-minute quarters and a full season, if he'd been able to move down and play that role 2 or 3 years ago, there was a Coleman medal in this guy. And I don't say that lightly. I actually think his father, Gary Ablett Sr, is the greatest player I've ever seen. There were things he could do on a football field that, I've never seen anybody do before or since. But for me, Gary Ablett's got to be in that conversation.
Yeah, absolutely right. And I think that another reason we probably don't speak about it as much is that he doesn't have a huge presence in the media either. I think that maybe we don't hear from Gary Ablett as much as we'd like. Particularly, there's such a hunger in the Australian media, particularly down here in Melbourne, to hear from our superstars. We hear from Patrick Dangerfield on a weekly basis. You get that feeling that there's a personal connection there. You really know the person. So I think that the fact that maybe Gary Ablett has stepped away from the media spotlight as well certainly plays into it. But you make a really good point. It would have been awesome to watch him play a full season as a forward. I don't necessarily agree with you that he would have won a Coleman medal, just because there's so many blokes in that forward line that would have been stealing goals off him. But it's really exciting just to think about what could potentially happen in the grand final this weekend, particularly with those blokes all combining in the forward line after he had such an excellent game on the weekend.
Well, let's talk about the grand final this weekend in a little bit more detail. So our second story today from Courtney Walsh in The Australian, who, just for the record, has been a fantastic guest on this program over the last few months as well. So big shout out to Courtney. He says that Richmond will head into Brisbane on Friday, hoping that the wet spell that's hit southern Queensland worsens ahead of Saturday night's grand final against Geelong. They're looking to complete their first successful premiership defence since 1974, and they're going to have their final training run on the Gabba before staying in Brisbane overnight. The Cats, in comparison, are happy to continue training at their base in Southport, content in the knowledge that they've been dominant in 5 outings on the grand final ground this year. A balmy night's expected in Brisbane on Saturday night, but the Weather Bureau rates the prospects of a thunderstorm hitting the Gabba at 33%, with the storm activity most likely to remain inland. We know that that in any weather, Richmond can play well. That's the beauty of their game. Justin Leppich, their assistant coach, says, I think the rain would help us, no doubt. It keeps the ball on the ground, and I think Geelong are a possession-based team. I think the whole footy world knows that. Do you think rain would be the great equaliser in this match? And do you think Richmond can win if it's not raining? You look at the data around Geelong's disposals. They're the leading mark takers in the competition. That they control the tempo so well, Nat.
Honestly, Pete, I don't think it matters if it rains or if it's going to be sunny. I think that Richmond's going to win this grand final regardless. They just seem to be coming so good at the right point of the season. They're going to be so difficult to beat. We know just how well they have performed in grand finals over the last couple of years. They're such a well-oiled machine. And, of course, Geelong, while they have made their first grand final since 2011, there's always been that little asterisk over them during a final series, just not being able to make it to the grand final and then, of course, to win it despite finishing on top of the ladder. So I think that Richmond are probably going to win regardless. It's interesting that Justin Leppich would say that, though, because such a big part of their game is their big forwards. Tom Lynch, without Tom Lynch last weekend, it could have potentially been a very different result. And similar with Jack Riewoldt, who, while he's not kicking as many goals, takes another defender and really just transforms the structure of the forward line. So it's really interesting to hear Leppich say that rain is going to be a benefit to them, particularly when they are so reliant on their big forwards. Of course, Geelong has also got a big forward in Tom Hawkins, who they rely quite heavily on. But it's going to be an interesting game. I actually think that the rain makes it a little bit more level, opposed to swinging it into Richmond's favour. But time will tell, of course.
I did, of course, play in round 17 at Metricon Stadium. It was the Tigers system which proved most effective in their 26-point win. They kicked a goal for every 39 possessions, compared to the Geelong Cats needing 76 touches every time to kick a goal. But there are some key inclusions in the team from that match. For that match, Gary Ablett didn't play. Gary Rowan and Joel Selwood were also absent. But for Richmond, Shane Edwards, David Asprey, Deon Prestia didn't play in that match either. Which of those, if you looked at those groups of 3 players, which are the bigger in?
It's just sensational to think that these clubs have gone so well in a season when they were missing such big names for large chunks of the year, isn't it? Just says so much about the depth of these top sides in the AFL. It's a tough one. It's almost a flip of the coin, isn't it? I think that you probably would have to say, as far as big game experience, not big game experience, but, the potential to change a game, to turn a game, you'd say that maybe the Geelong players were the bigger ins, the likes of course, Selwood, you mentioned, Gary Rowan as well, and Ablett as well, who we've already spoken just how great he's been since he's returned into the hub. From that perspective, I think you'd have to say that the Geelong players are the bigger names. They're the bigger inclusions, but you can't underestimate just how important those players have been for Richmond. And, you know, just really helping them strive towards potentially winning back-to-back grand finals.
Yeah, Shane Edwards, I think, is an extremely underrated player and part of the heartbeat of that football side. And it's probably no coincidence that there's been an upturn in their fortune since he returned, from that quarantine. And Dion Prestia, I mean, he's the reigning Jack Dyer medalist, I believe. I could be wrong. I'm pretty sure, though. And he's missed most of the season with injury, but he's just such a ruthless big body in that midfield, and definitely going to have an impact as well. Hey, Nat, let's turn to the NRL. Grand final on Sunday evening between the Melbourne Storm and Penrith Panthers. And we're all kind of anticipating and expecting that this will be the last time we see Cameron Smith play for the Melbourne Storm. Over 400 matches. He's been an incredible footballer. Still is, really. It's remarkable that at age 37, he's still arguably in the top half dozen players in the competition and could go round if he wanted to. From a football perspective, there's absolutely no issue there. But it looks like it'll probably be his last game, even though he hasn't formally announced that. Andrew Webster in the Sydney Morning Herald has written Cameron Smith's book alongside him and spent a lot of time with Cameron and his wife Barb over the last 18 months or so. And he's written a really nice piece that gives just, again, some greater insight into the man and into the career he's had and into why he is the way he is and why he hasn't necessarily let the public know, which way he's leaning at the end of this match. He talks about how Cameron Smith's brilliance as a footballer is in his meticulous preparation through the week and his execution on game day. It's his knowledge of the smaller details, especially when he's slowly moving into dummy half and sizing up the opposition like the Terminator moving in for the kill. I love that line from Webby. He has been perhaps unfairly maligned, particularly in New South Wales. He was, of course, the Queensland captain for that period of dominance in the state of origin. We know New South Wales isn't particularly fond of the Melbourne Storm either. There's been the salary cap dramas back in the day as well. So he's been pretty unfairly maligned, I think, at times across the journey. Would you go as far as to say we've taken Cameron Smith as a footballer for granted? And then, further to that, because he is such a perfectionist and because he is so driven by success, is there still the slightest of chance as he goes around again if the Storm don't win on Sunday?
In answer to your first question, Pete, 100%. Yes. Having lived in New South Wales, having lived in Sydney, Cameron Smith has been taken for granted as a footballer. He's been so maligned in the media. He's constantly attacked in the media. As a Melbourne fan, you just feel that they're always looking for something with Cameron Smith. And if he had been a New South Wales player, Cameron Smith's legacy as a footballer would be completely different. He would be, we would be talking about him up there with the likes of Andrew Johns and those kinds of guys. But we're not, because A, he was a Queenslander, B, he was a Melbourne player. I actually think that the Melbourne Storm element really plays into this even more than the fact that he was a champion Maroon. I think that New South Wales media have been really, really unfair to the Melbourne Storm for a very, very long period of time. So I think that in that regard, Cameron Smith, we've taken him for granted because he is a future immortal, let's be perfectly honest. He's been an excellent player for such a long period of time in such a successful team. And I think it's fair to say that they have been so successful because Cameron Smith has been there, not just because he's an excellent player, but because he's an excellent leader as well. Now, in answer to your second question, I honestly don't think that Cameron Smith's decided whether or not he's going to play on next year. Just listening to the way he was talking yesterday at the captain's, coaches' press conferences, it almost sounds like he's genuinely unsure what he's going to do next year. And I can completely understand why that would be the case. He's playing excellent football. The way that Melbourne Storm play when he is in that side is completely different to when he's not. I think that Smith and a couple of others missed that last game of the season, and while Pappenhausen was, had the kicking boots on, it was just a completely different result. So I think that Cameron Smith is just so important to the Melbourne Storm, and he could easily go around again. And I think the fact he's playing so well, is certainly contributing to how difficult a decision it is for him to make. But I know Storm want him to make a decision because there's a young man named Harry Grant who's going around for the West Tigers at the moment, who's had a ripping season over there as a rookie, and he's obviously just on loan, so could potentially be coming back to Storm next year and would be slotting into that number 9 jersey. So everyone very interested to see what Smithy will do next year.
And an interesting aside as well, you speak about Smith in comparison to Andrew Johns. Well, Andrew Johns' brother Matthew's actually written a column in the Daily Telegraph today where he details why Cameron has gone past his brother Andrew, which is a really good read as well. I recommend you check that out. Staying with NRL for our penultimate story, and it comes from Brad Walter at NRL.com, again, a real friend of the show and a fantastic journalist. And he's looked at the 30-year formula for success, which is set to deliver a Panthers premiership. Build from within. That was the philosophy Ivan Cleary adopted when he first took charge of Penrith in 2012. In his first season at Penrith, Luke Lewis, Michael Jennings, Lachlan Coote, Sam McKendry and Tim Grant were the only local juniors considered to be regular members of the Panthers team. But if you fast forward to this year, and we know that obviously Cleary left for a while in the middle of that period, but if you fast forward to this year, you see a Panthers side playing in the grand final, which boasts 13 players who made their NRL debuts at that club, including, of course, Ivan Cleary's son, Nathan. It was a formula that helped the Panthers to premiership success in 1991 against Canberra and 2003 against the Sydney Roosters. Cleary handed further debuts to Josh Mansour in 2012, Isaiah Yeo in 2015. Since he's returned, Brian Tuo, Liam Martin, Stephen Crichton, Brent Naden, others like Jerome Luai, Tyrone May, Dylan Edwards and Moses Leota were part of that Panthers system that was coming through and made their debut while Cleary was away from the club. Of course, they won the 2015 National Youth Competition Grand Final for the under-20s. A lot of those players have graduated from there. When we look at this Penrith team, Nat, how much has their local connection and their connectedness as a group played a role in their remarkable season?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, having so much talent out there in the western suburbs of Sydney is also going to help the Panthers. It's amazing that it's been so long since they actually have played in the grand final, given the amount of talent that is out there. It's always been one of rugby's big issues, is that they haven't been able to tap into that market because there is so many talented young footballers out there, but they're all playing rugby league, and that's where it works out for Penrith, and it certainly has in this situation. I think the fact that Ivan Cleary did come back to the club has also really contributed to them going so well this year. Not necessarily because he's been an excellent coach, but because it's meant that his son Nathan has stayed at the club and he's really been the superstar standout for them this season. So, yeah, it's really interesting to see how much local talent has come through, and I think that it's certainly contributed to their success this season.
I've loved the stories about, walking around with the boombox and shooting hoops and playing basketball and, the fine system they have in place. There's certainly a really connected group, and Josh Mansour spoke yesterday about the fact he never wants to leave this club. He wants to stay for life, and regardless as to the result on Sunday night, and for what it's worth, I'm tipping the Storm, and I would be willing to bet that you might be as well. I think it really looks like there's a potential legacy here at Penrith that could see them successful for a number of seasons. Am I right that you're tipping the Storm?
I am tipping the Storm, but I do think you're right. I think that even if Penrith don't win this grand final, I think that they're going to be a force to be reckoned with for seasons to come. Of course, maybe experience just gets Melbourne Storm over the line. I'm a little bit concerned about the rain though, Pete. We've got a couple of speedsters in the Melbourne Storm side, and I just think that the rain that's forecast for Sydney over weekend is just going to have a big impact on what the result might be or what the end score might be.
Couple of speedsters lining up in the purple for the final time as well in Vunivalu and Josh Addo-Carr. So very interesting indeed. Our final story today is something a little bit different. It ties in nicely to the NRL and AFL grand finals, and it's an opinion piece from Richard Hines at the ABC, who looks at the national anthem and the Welcome to Country, which will take place as two separate elements to both of those grand finals. The Welcome to Country, as Hines writes, is a fitting moment of Indigenous recognition and a belated acknowledgement of 232 years of false entitlement. He doesn't hold back there. In regards to the national anthem, well, I mean, this is a topic I've chatted about with mates for for years, working in rugby union in the past in such an international game, comparing the Australian anthem with the South African anthem, with Flower of Scotland, with Ireland's Call, which isn't even a national anthem. It's tailor-made for rugby to unite the Northern Irish and the Republic of Ireland, and whether Advanced Australia Fair actually has lived up to the same sort of level in terms of rousing the players and getting them ready to play. And that's essentially what Richard Hines is saying, but not just from a who's got the best anthem banter perspective. He's talking about the fact that it's disappointing our anthem doesn't really tie into a multiracial nation, and that it's not the kind of soaring anthem that brings the many strands of a multiracial nation together. And kind of suggests that it's unfortunate we have to have these two separate things in the Welcome to Country and the National Anthem rather than one intertwined, all-encompassing celebration of Australia and our cultures. He references the South African anthem and the New Zealand anthems, which have verses in different languages. And I guess it's an interesting concept to look at, Nat, and something that I think a lot of people will give consideration over the next few days when they see those anthems.
Yeah, it's certainly going to be a big couple of days from that perspective, Pete. First and foremost, nationalism aside, Advanced Australia Fair is probably not the most inspiring song. In fact, it's probably not even that good a song, full stop. I'm just watching the Bledisloe on the weekend. You hear the Kiwi national anthem, which in my opinion is one of the best national anthems in the world. And then you hear the Australian national anthem, and it's basically chalk and cheese when it comes to that inspiring nature of it. But I actually think that Richard Hines makes an excellent point. If we were to change the Australian national anthem, which is obviously a very contentious topic and a very political topic, but if we were to do it, he's right. There should be some sort of element that really does incorporate our Indigenous heritage in this country, because the Indigenous people haven't been taken care of as well as they should have been in history, and they really do need to be acknowledged. It's lovely that we do have a Welcome to Country, but down the track, if we were to change the national anthem, it would be nice to see something like that incorporated into it that really does include the whole nation, including those people that have been so ostracised for such a long period of time. And just while we are on the whole Black Lives Matter movement and so forth, just really disappointing to see Nick Farr-Jones's comments during the week about urging the Wallabies not to take a knee during the national anthem against the All Blacks. In Bledisloe 3. I think it was just a little bit tone deaf from the former Wallabies captain there. Of course, Black Lives Matter doesn't just include Indigenous people, it also includes Islanders and other ethnicities, which the Wallabies have a very high percentage of, and a high percentage of fans from those kinds of nations as well. So I think it was just a little bit tone deaf from Nick Farr-Jones, and I would definitely be supporting the Wallabies if they were to take a knee.
Yeah, I'm going to take it even a step further. I thought it wasn't only a little bit tone deaf, but if I had to compare it with somebody, I'd compare it with the types of quotes we've become used to seeing from Margaret Court when it comes to same-sex marriage and the divisive nature of Nick Farr-Jones' comments, around a sport that is roughly 50% participation rate at a professional level is Pacifica players. Nick Farr-Jones, just irrelevant. Nobody go to this guy for a grab anymore, because unfortunately you lose all your credibility when you make a statement like that about something that you really have no right to be speaking about. I just thought it was beyond comprehension that a man who was a fantastic captain of the Wallabies, don't get me wrong, but a man who's been inside the tent within Australia Rugby for a while, well, he shouldn't be any longer. He should be shown the door after those comments. But there you go. That's just my opinion on that one, and a really good point from you to raise it within this context. That's all we've got time for. It's been a whole bunch of fun. I've had a great time speaking with yourself and all the other wonderful guests, over 20 different journalists who've been joining me on the Best On Ground Weekday Kickoff, nearly 90 episodes and thousands of people watching and listening. So it's been enormous. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me, Pete. Like I said earlier, it's been a great way to start the morning, and it's been a real honour to really preview both the AFL and NRL Grand Finals with you today.
And you may not be quite completely rid of me for the year, because Jimmy Tucker and I might be plotting a little something around the final two Bledisloe Cup matches, so there might still be a couple of little special episodes to come. Watch this space. But thank you so much for watching and listening to the best on ground weekday kickoff. We'll see you in 2021.